The door of the crossroads lantern flew open so hard it cracked against the wall and nearly tore free of its iron hinges, and Benjamin Keller looked up from the bar where he had been drying a cup to find the most enormous, most furious, and most thoroughly soaked woman he had ever seen standing in his doorway. She was not merely tall in the way that some women were tall. She was enormous in the way that the old oaks at the edge of Murrenfeld Lake were enormous, the kind of presence that made the room around her feel smaller and more fragile just by occupying it. She stood well over 6 feet in the doorway of his inn, rain sheeting off her in silver curtains, her dark green skin gleaming like polished river stone under the lamplight. Her tusks were ivory and sharp, curving up from her lower lip with a warrior's deliberate elegance, and her black hair had been braided tight against her skull before the storm clearly had its way with it, the braids coming half loose so that ropes of wet hair clung to her broad shoulders and her jaw. She wore fitted warrior's leathers, a sleeveless dark brown bodice cinched tight with crossed leather straps that traced the full power of her figure, paired with close-cut trousers laced down the outer seam, and knee-high boots caked in like mud. A short curved blade hung at her left hip. A long scar ran from her left collarbone, visible above the bodice's edge, all the way up to her jaw, old and silver-white against the green. Her eyes, which were a furious shade of amber, were fixed directly on Benjamin like he had done something personally wrong to her. Behind her, through the still-open door, the night was absolute chaos. Thunder split the sky over Murrenfeld every 30 seconds. The wooden docks that lined the village's lake shore groaned and clattered in the wind. Rain hammered the shingle roof of the inn with a sound like hoofbeats. There were 4 other people in the crossroads lantern that night. Old Sarandast, who drank here every evening and would probably die in the chair he was sitting in. 2 merchants named Holt and Copley who were waiting out the storm before the morning road, and Benjamin's half-deaf barback Tomas, who had gone wide-eyed and pressed himself flat against the shelf of bottles. None of them moved. None of them breathed. The orc woman looked at Benjamin with those burning amber eyes, rain dripping off the point of her chin, and she said, in a voice like gravel over a stone floor, "The next village is 12 miles east, and there is a washed-out bridge between me and it. I need a room for the night." Benjamin set the cup down on the bar. He looked at her. He looked at the lake of water forming around her boots on his swept floor. He looked at the way Holt's hand had gone to the little belt knife he wore, which was about as useful against this woman as a toothpick, and he made a decision. "I have a room," he said. "It is 3 coppers for the night, includes breakfast. You want to hang your things by the fire to dry, I can see to that too." There was a beat of silence. The woman blinked. It seemed like it might have been the first time this evening anyone had responded to her with something other than a slammed door. 3 coppers, she said slowly, as if translating the concept. 3 coppers, Benjamin confirmed. He came around the bar and walked past the frozen merchants to the door, reached past her enormous frame without touching her, and pushed the door firmly shut against the gale. "You standing out there in the rain does not help either of us." Her amber eyes tracked him the entire time. Not with malice exactly, but with the steady, measuring quality of a predator deciding whether the thing in front of it constituted a threat. He met the look steadily, which he could tell surprised her. "I have coin," she said finally. "Good," said Benjamin. "Come in then. Tomas, would you get the lady a towel, please, and something hot?" Tomas emerged from behind the bottles with the expression of a man performing a task he would discuss with his grandchildren. He produced a linen towel and held it out at arm's length. The orc woman looked at it, looked at him, and took it with a hand that could have wrapped entirely around Tomas's head, and Tomas went to make tea with a speed Benjamin had never seen from him before. She stood near the fire, because Benjamin had steered her gently toward it by simply walking in that direction himself, and trusting she would follow, which she did. She used the towel on her face and hair without ceremony, squeezing water from the half-loose braids with efficient, practical movements. The fire caught the green of her skin and made it warm gold in places. Up close, Benjamin could see she was roughly his own age, late 20s, perhaps early 30s. The scar on her jaw was fully healed and long settled. Her hands, when she lowered the towel, were scarred across the knuckles too, but steady, not shaking. Whatever her fury had been when she walked in, it was already folding itself down into something more contained and watchful. "Benjamin Keller," he said, and held out his hand. She looked at the hand, then at him. The amber eyes were extraordinarily direct. "Zarkha Frostwolf," she said, and took the hand. Her grip was firm and enormous, and she shook it once, the way a person shakes hands when they mean to be honest about their own strength. "Have you eaten tonight, Zarkha?" "No." "Then sit down and I will bring you something, and you can pay me after." Old Sarandast had not moved from his chair, but he had swiveled his entire body toward them and was watching with the open fascination of a man who no longer cared what anyone thought of him. Merchant Holt had his belt knife out now. Not raised, not threatening, just out, resting on the table with his hand over it. Merchant Copley had scooted his chair almost imperceptibly toward the wall. Benjamin looked at Holt. "Put the knife away," he said quietly. "She is a paying guest and she has not offered anyone here the slightest harm." "She is an orc," Holt said, as if this were a self-completing sentence. "She is a woman caught in a storm with no bridge to cross," Benjamin said. He kept his voice even and his face pleasant, the same face he used with difficult drunks before things escalated, the face that said he was not frightened and he was not going to move. "And she is in my inn under my roof and will be treated accordingly. Is that understood?" Holt stared at him. He put the knife away. Zarkha said nothing through any of this. But when Benjamin turned back to her with a steaming bowl of the lamb stew he kept on the hearth, he caught the very edge of something on her face. Not surprise, exactly, but a quality that sat just beside it. The watchfulness was still there, but the set of her jaw had changed by a fraction. She ate the stew. She ate the bread he brought. She drank the tea Tomas had made. She did all of this with her back to the wall and her eyes moving across the room at intervals, the blade at her hip never touched but clearly never forgotten. Benjamin did not pester her. He wiped the bar, he cleared the merchant's empty cups, he said good night to old Sarin, who shuffled out into the rain with his coat held over his head. When the merchants finally retired to their rooms, Holt throwing one last look over his shoulder that Zarkha met without blinking, the common room was quiet except for the fire and the storm. "Your room is the second one on the left," Benjamin said from behind the bar, where he was tallying the night's receipts. "There is a bolt on the inside. Water for washing is in the pitcher on the stand, but it will be cold. I can heat more in the morning." Zarkha had set the empty bowl on the table in front of her. She was sitting with her elbows on her knees, which put her eyes level with his face across the bar, and she was watching him again with that steady amber gaze. "Why did you let me in?" she asked. Benjamin considered the question. It was direct and honest and deserved the same. "Because it is a stormy night," he said, "and you needed a room and I have rooms. That is the arrangement I offer." "The last two inns I tried before yours," she said, "one told me they were full, the other told me to sleep under the dock in the rain." "I know the man who runs the barrel house on Dock Street," Benjamin said. "He was not full. He has 4 empty rooms on a good week." He met her eyes. "I am sorry that happened." She was quiet for a moment. "You are not afraid of me." "I did not say that," Benjamin said. "You are clearly formidable and you are not in a good mood. But afraid is not the same as cautious, and cautious is not the same as unkind." Something shifted behind her eyes. It was brief and quickly contained, but it was there. 3 coppers, she said. She reached into the pouch at her belt and set the coins on the bar with a precise, deliberate click. "Breakfast included, you said." "I did," said Benjamin. "Then I will take the room." She stood, and the standing of her was a remarkable thing. A full unfolding from her seated position that brought her to her entire height with a natural, unstudied grace, like watching something that had been built correctly. She gathered the damp towel, picked up the pack she had left by the door when she came in, and walked to the hallway without further ceremony. At the door to the hall she paused, did not turn fully, said to the doorframe rather than to him, The stew was good. There will be more in the morning, Benjamin said. She went through the door and he listened to the deliberate, unhurried sound of her boots on the floorboards until he heard the creak of the second door on the left, and then the quiet, solid sound of a bolt sliding home. Benjamin stood behind his bar in the empty, fire-lit room with the storm hammering the roof and the lake out there in the dark churning and wild, and felt the strange, settled certainty of a man who has done exactly the right thing. He had no idea yet what it was going to cost him. In the morning she was already sitting at the fire when Benjamin came down, and she had her blade laid across her knees and was drawing a whetstone along it with long, focused strokes. She had rebraided her hair, tightly this time, the way it had originally been, except that he could see now the braids were intricate and deliberate, each one beginning at the crown and running down to a neat tie at the nape of her neck. She was still in the same leathers, which had dried to a warm, dark brown. In the morning light through the lakeside windows, with the storm past and the water outside lying flat and silver and glassy, she looked different than she had in the doorway last night. Not less fearsome exactly, but more real, more person and less force of nature. "Eggs and salt bread," Benjamin said, going to the kitchen, "or porridge if you prefer something warm." "Eggs," she said, without looking up from the blade. He made eggs with a little rosemary and the hard salt bread he baked in batches and kept in the larder. He made enough for himself as well because he had been up since before dawn checking for storm damage to the dockside shutters and he was hungry. He brought 2 plates to the common room without ceremony and set one in front of her. She looked at the plate. She looked at him sitting down across from her with his own plate. "You are eating with me," she said. "I eat breakfast in the common room," he said. "It is my routine, but I can eat at the bar if you would rather." A pause. "No," she said. She sheathed the blade at her hip and pulled the plate toward her. They ate in silence for a while, which was a comfortable enough silence because neither of them was the kind of person who felt the need to fill it. Through the windows, Murrenfeld Lake was beginning to come alive with the early morning fishing boats pushing off from the docks, a cart horse picking its way along the dock road, 2 women hanging storm-soaked laundry from their lines again. "You said the bridge east was washed out," Benjamin said eventually. "I crossed it last month," Zarkha said. "It was already weak. Last night finished it. Where are you headed?" She was quiet for a beat, in the way of someone deciding how much to say. "I was hired to escort a merchant's shipment to the timber market in Ostwin. The merchant had a route that went east. The bridge being gone means I need a new route." "You can go north along the lake shore," Benjamin said. "Takes an extra day and a half, but the roads are solid stone until the weighhouse at Pharaoh's Mill, then packed dirt the rest of the way. It is how the cart drivers come in winter." She looked up at him with those amber eyes. "You know this road?" "I supply this in from Ostwin twice a year," he said. "I know every road in 50 miles. She looked out at the lake. "North," she said, as if placing it on an inner map. "The shipment," Benjamin said. "Are you traveling alone?" "The merchant's carters are a day behind me. I rode ahead yesterday to find lodging at the bridge village before the storm hit. Now there is no bridge and no lodging, and I need to send word back to reroute them." She said all of this with the flat practicality of someone who was already working through the problem, not complaining about it. "There is a message rider who runs the Murrenfeld to Ostwin Road," Benjamin said. "He stops here every morning around the 3rd bell. You could give him a letter for the carters." Another pause. "You have pen and paper." In the desk behind the bar. She looked at him with an expression he was beginning to understand was her version of gratitude, a long, considering look that held more warmth than her face generally allowed. "You are very useful," she said. He laughed. It surprised both of them slightly, a real, short, easy laugh not performed. "I try to be," he said. She wrote the letter. Her handwriting was large and precise, the letters formed with the same deliberateness she applied to everything. The rider took it at the 3rd bell. The merchants Holt and Copley left at dawn without looking at Zarkha, who was down at the dock throwing pieces of bread to the ducks with an expression of absolute serenity. Benjamin watched her from the inn's front window and felt something complicated happen in his chest. She came back inside when the chill off the lake got sharp and said, "I need to wait here for my Carters. That is 2, possibly 3 days." "The room is 3 coppers a night," Benjamin said. "Including breakfast," she said. "Including breakfast," he confirmed. The faintest edge of something moved across her face, barely a smile, but it was there. The next 2 days were the most interesting 2 days the Crossroads Lantern had seen in a long time, and Benjamin, who had run this inn alone for 4 years since his uncle left it to him, and had grown somewhat accustomed to the particular quiet of a man with no close company, was surprised by how much he enjoyed every moment of them. Zarkha did not simply sit in the common room and wait. She moved. She sharpened every blade she owned, of which there turned out to be 4. She mended a strap on her pack, with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. She walked the dock road in the mornings, always just before he opened the front shutters, and he would see her coming back along the dock with her face turned toward the lake, and the water gleaming on the leather of her boots where the dock spray caught her. She was watchful of the other villagers in the way of someone who expected hostility and was prepared for it, but was not, in herself, hostile. She did not go looking for trouble, but she did not flinch when it looked at her, either. On the first evening she sat at the fire again and he sat at the bar tallying receipts, and after an hour of comfortable quiet she said, without preamble, "How long have you run this inn?" 4 years, he said. "It was my uncle's before me. He had no children of his own. I was the nearest thing to family he had. And before that, I worked a river trade boat out of Carveth for 2 years. Before that I apprenticed to a factor in Ostwin who traded in bulk goods." He paused. "I am not a particularly romantic history." "Where are your family?" she asked. The question was asked without presumption. It was the same direct practicality she applied to everything, as if she simply wanted to know the shape of the world she was looking at. "Mother died when I was 16, he said. "Fever. Father followed her about a year later. I think he mostly decided not to go on without her." He said this without excessive weight. It was true and settled, and he had made his peace with it. "There was just me after that and Uncle Corvin." Zarkha was quiet for a moment. "My mother lives," she said then. "She is in the Frostwolf clan's winter camp in the Karath Hills. My father died in the 7th Border skirmish when I was 22. She paused. "He was a good man." "I am sorry," Benjamin said, and meant it plainly. She nodded once. "He was the one who taught me the blade," she said. "He said a woman who can defend herself is a woman who can choose her own life." She looked at the fire. He was right. Benjamin thought about that. "He sounds like he was very right," he said. She looked at him across the room then with a full, open look that held something deeper than the watchful measuring of their first night. She was not just evaluating whether he was a threat. She was looking at him, seeing him, in the specific way that matters. He held the look and did not look away. By the second afternoon, something had shifted between them in the quiet, incremental way that water finds its way through stone, not crashing through, just finding the path that was always there. He was showing her how the dockside trap hatches worked, because she had offered, with the casual competence of someone who understood mechanical things and was bored, to help him replace the storm-broken latch on the rear dock hatch. And they were crouched side by side on the wet dock boards in the thin autumn sun, and he was aware of her shoulder against his, and of the smell of her clean leather and something sharper and cooler, like river water and pine, and of the way her enormous hands moved with such fine precision on the tiny iron bolt. "Hold it still," she said, and her hand covered his on the bolt to stop his slight tremor. Her hand was warm. Her grip was entirely steady. He held still. She ran the iron pin through the hatch with one smooth movement and it seated perfectly. "There," she said. She did not immediately remove her hand from his. He did not immediately move his away. For about 3 seconds they were crouched on the dock with her hand over his and the lake spread out before them, enormous and silver gray, and a heron standing on a post 50 yards out looking at nothing. Then she withdrew her hand and stood, brushing the dock grit from her knees, and he stood too, and neither of them said anything about it, but the air between them was different after that. It was warmer. Her carters arrived on the morning of the third day, 4 men with 2 loaded wagons, trail-worn and relieved to have found her. They camped at the edge of the inn's yard rather than paying for rooms, which was their right, and Zarkha spent an hour with them going over the rerouted northern road and checking the wagons for storm travel readiness. Benjamin watched from the kitchen window while he made the morning bread and noted with a private, complicated feeling that she was leaving. When the carters had eaten and watered their horses and the wagons were ready, Zarkha came back into the inn. She set 6 coppers on the bar 2 nights' worth and stood before him with her pack on her back and her blade at her hip and her braids tight and her amber eyes steady. "Ostwin is 12 days on the northern road," she said. "Give or take a day depending on weather," Benjamin agreed. "The return trip would take the same." He looked at her. "Yes, I will be back through Murrenfeld on the return," she said. "The northern road is the only option since the bridge is gone." "That is true," he said. She held his gaze for a long moment, and in it he could read if he was reading it correctly, and he believed he was something that was half a question and half a statement of intent, the sort of communication that warriors and solitary people used when words felt like too much exposure. "I will keep the room available," he said quietly. Something in her face settled, resolved. "3 coppers," she said. "Including breakfast," he said. And this time, the almost smile she gave him was entirely real and entirely warm, and she turned and walked out into the morning sun where her carters were waiting. He stood at the window and watched the wagons roll out northward along the lake shore road until the last dust settled and the road was empty, and he was surprised by the quality of the silence she left behind. It was not the normal empty quiet of the inn on a slow morning. It was the silence of an absence, and absence is only felt when something was there. He spent the day cleaning rooms and doing his accounts and preparing supply orders and not thinking about her particularly, which was a project that failed so completely it almost made him smile. In Murrenfeld village, the inn sat at the junction of the north-south Lake Road and the east-west Trade Road, which gave it its name, the Crossroads Lantern. The village itself was small, clustered at the southernmost bend of the lake where the dock trade was thickest. There were perhaps 300 people in Murrenfeld proper, another 100 scattered along the lake's shore farms. Benjamin knew most of them by name, bought his fish from the lake boats, his bread grain from the mill at Farrow's End, his candles from the chandler on Dock Street. He was part of the village in the way that an inn is always part of a place, the crossroads between all its lives, the place where travelers and locals briefly shared the same fire. He was not unhappy. He was certain of that. But there was a kind of aloneness to the life that he had simply grown used to, the way you grow used to a draft through a shutter you never quite managed to fix, not cold enough to address, just perpetually, quietly there. It was in this ordinary state of things that the commissioners arrived. They came from Carveth, which was the nearest city of any size and had recently acquired, through an election Benjamin had followed with vague discomfort, a new prefect named Aldous Greer. Greer had campaigned on a platform of what he called purification of the border trade corridors, a phrase that meant, when you stripped the ceremonial language away, the systematic removal of any non-human individuals from the trade zones around Carveth. It had started with trade licensing restrictions on orcs and had been spreading, like a cold, to the surrounding villages. 2 commissioners rode into Murrenfeld on a gray Thursday, 4 weeks after Zarkha had left with her carters. They were officious men in gray coats with brass buttons, and they posted notices on the Dock Road notice board, the mill, and the front of Benjamin's Inn without asking permission first. The notice read, "By order of Prefect Greer and the Municipal Authority of Carveth, any individual of orc descent conducting commerce within the certified trade corridors must present a signed bureau license within 30 days of this posting, or be considered in violation of the Commercial Purity Ordinance and subject to removal. Innkeepers and lodging providers are reminded that providing shelter to unlicensed non-human individuals may constitute abetment under the ordinance. Benjamin read this notice. He read it twice. He took it off the front of his inn and put it under the bar, which he recognized was an inadequate protest, but was the one immediately available to him. He went to find Alderman Preuss, who governed Murrenfeld's small council, and found him reading his own copy with the expression of a man who had eaten something disagreeable. "What does this mean, practically speaking?" Benjamin asked. "It means," said Preuss slowly, "that any orc who passes through for trade or who works in the docks or who uses the road through our village can be stopped and questioned, and if they don't have a paper from Carveth they can be detained." He rubbed his face. "The commissioners have authority from the prefect's office. I can't simply throw them out. Doc Ferreth has docked his fishing boat at our south pier for 11 years, Benjamin said. Doc Ferreth was half-orc, traded his catch every week at the Murrenfeld dock market, had a house on the lake shore with a dock he maintained himself, and was on 3-sentence conversation terms with everyone in the village. He does not have a bureau license because there was no bureau license 3 months ago." "I know," said Preuss, "and the orc escorts who travel the trade roads, they stop here every season." "I know, Benjamin. This is wrong," Benjamin said. "I know that too," said Preuss, with the weariness of a man who was right and knew it and also knew it did not help. "But the prefect's authority covers the trade corridors and our road is a certified corridor. I need to speak to the village council. In the meantime, I would advise everyone to be cautious." Benjamin walked back to his inn with the cold, specific anger of a person who can see clearly what is happening and cannot immediately stop it, and he took out his ledger and looked at the date, and counted 12 days' travel and a return trip, and thought about timing. He sent a message north by the first rider he could find. The message said simply, "There are commissioners in Murrenfeld from Carveth's new prefect. They are enforcing something called the Commercial Purity Ordinance. Any orc traveling the corridor without a bureau license can be detained. I thought you should know before you return through the village. Use care." He signed it Benjamin Keller, Crossroads Lantern. He did not know if the message would reach her before she set out on the return. He sent it anyway. He was polite and professional to the 2 commissioners when they came to the inn for supper that evening, because they were traveling men who had not invented the law they were enforcing, and because alienating them directly would accomplish nothing useful. They were cold-faced men who ate his food without compliment and drank his ale and spoke to each other about licensing quotas, and Benjamin served them with the same even composure he brought to everyone, and did not say a word about the notice they had pinned to his inn's wall, which he had taken down, and did not say. The village was tense in a way that reminded Benjamin of weather, the particular atmospheric pressure that comes before a serious storm, when everything is still and too bright and the birds have gone quiet. 12 days came and went. The commissioners were still there, having set up a kind of checkpoint post at the Dock Road Junction, which was, by some geographical nastiness, exactly outside Benjamin's front window. Doc Ferreth had not come to the dock market. The 2 orc women who sold lakeweed baskets at the South Market stall had not appeared. The orc family who farmed the North Shore property had sent their human-looking daughter to do the town shopping instead. One by one, the small, ordinary presences that were simply part of Murrenfeld's daily life were contracting and withdrawing, like a tide pulling back. Then, on the 13th day, a little before the noon bell, Benjamin heard the carts on the North Road. He was at the bar when he heard them, and he put down what he was doing and went to the front window, and there they were, 2 heavy wagons coming down from the north along the lake road, and riding ahead on a bay horse, sitting her saddle with the complete, upright ease of someone who had ridden 10,000 miles and trusted her horse absolutely, was Zarkha Frostwolf. She had not gotten his message. Or she had gotten it and decided it did not change her route. Either way, she was here, riding directly toward the checkpoint at the Dock Road Junction, where both commissioners were currently sitting at their little table under a canvas awning with their ledger and their rubber stamps. Benjamin did not think. He was out the front door before the thought was finished. Zarkha. He walked out into the road and raised his hand. She saw him. The horse slowed. She rode toward him and stopped 10 yards from the checkpoint, and she looked at the checkpoint, and she looked at him, and he could see from her face that she had read the whole scene the moment she came around the bend and had been making her own calculations. "I sent a message," he said quietly, coming to stand at her horse's head. "I was already past the weigh house when the rider found me," she said, equally quiet. Her eyes were on the commissioners, who had both turned and were watching the orc woman arrive on horseback with the concentrated attention of men who had found exactly what they were looking for. "Do you have a bureau license?" he asked. "I have never heard of a bureau license," she said. "You will want one, apparently." One of the commissioners, the taller one, a man named Fetch who wore his authority in the set of his mouth, was already on his feet and walking toward them. "State your name, your origin, and your business in the Carveth Trade Corridor," Fetch said, addressing Zarkha over Benjamin's head with the particular loudness of official speech designed to carry to witnesses. Zarkha looked at him with those amber eyes. "I am returning from a licensed trade escort through Ostwin," she said. "My name is Zarkha Frostwolf. My business is complete and I am passing through on the return road." "Orc," said Fetch. "Yes," said Zarkha with utter calm. "You are required to present a bureau license for commercial activity in this corridor." "I was not aware of this requirement when I entered the corridor," Zarkha said, "because it did not exist when I entered the corridor." "Be that as it may," said Fetch, "you are subject to detainment until the licensing status of your passage can be verified." Zarkha's horse shifted under her, picking up the tension in her body. She controlled it with one hand and one heel without looking at it. Her other hand, Benjamin noticed, had dropped to her hip, not to the blade, just resting at her hip, which was its own kind of readiness. "You cannot detain her," Benjamin said. Both commissioners looked at him with mild surprise, the way that official people look at ordinary people who have said something they were not supposed to. "Mr. Keller," said Fetch, "I would advise you not to involve yourself. The ordinance applies to commercial activity," Benjamin said. He had spent the last 4 days thinking about this. "She is on the return leg of a completed escort. The commerce was conducted in Ostwin, which is not in this corridor. She is not conducting commerce here. She is passing through." Fetch blinked. His colleague, the shorter one named Rast, frowned at his ledger. "Furthermore," Benjamin said, and he said it clearly and in a carrying voice, because he was aware that the checkpoint's position in front of his inn meant that a growing number of people on Dock Street could hear this conversation. "I am prepared to attest in writing to her identity, her business, and the dates of her stopover at my inn, which I am legally within my rights to provide as a character attestation under the Commerce Licensing Act of the 5th Prefect, which predates Prefect Greer's ordinance by 40 years. This was not a thing he had known 3 weeks ago. He had borrowed the Commerce Licensing Act from Alderman Pruce's shelf of legal texts and read it by lamplight every evening for a week. Fetch's mouth did a complicated thing. His colleague Rast was definitely reading the ledger now with an expression that suggested he was finding something inconvenient in it. "That attestation would need to be provided in writing," Fetch said, having clearly found no immediate counter. "Entirely," said Benjamin. "Come inside and I will write it now." He did not look at Zarkha, but he heard the creak of her saddle as she very deliberately relaxed. The attestation was written and signed and witnessed by Alderman Pruce, who turned up at Benjamin's bar 20 minutes later with the air of a man who had been watching through a window and decided to be useful. Fetch stamped it with his bureau stamp because legally he had to, and both commissioners left on the afternoon South Road that same day, citing that their posting in Murrenfeld had concluded. They had not found, in 3 weeks in the village, a single orc or half-orc in violation of the ordinance, because every person it would have applied to had quietly made themselves unavailable until it passed, and the ordinance required findings within 30 days to justify a permanent checkpoint. Benjamin watched them go from his front doorway. Behind him, Zarkha Frostwolf said, "You read the Commerce Licensing Act." "I read most of it," he said. "The later chapters are quite dry." "You did that before you knew I was coming," she said. "I thought you might be coming," he said. He turned around and found her very close. She had come to stand just behind him in the doorway, and up close in the daylight she was a remarkable thing. The amber eyes were doing that full, open, unguarded looking that he had seen once before across the fire on her second night here, and it was more intense now. "Why?" she asked. "Because you said you would come back," he said. She looked at him for a long-held moment. Then she put one enormous, careful hand on his jaw, cupping it, the way a person holds something they are not certain is real. Her thumb was against his cheek. Her palm was warm. "You went to considerable trouble for someone you met in a storm," she said. "You fixed my dock hatch," he said, which made her breath hitch in something that was almost very nearly a laugh. She leaned down because she had to lean down, the difference in their heights requiring it, and she kissed him. It was not tentative. It was the kind of kiss that comes from someone who does not do things by halves, steady and warm and deliberate, one hand on his jaw and her forehead tipping to his afterward, her eyes closed and her breath slow. He put his hands on her arms, which were the first part of her he could reach, and held on. The village was watching. He did not care at all. She pulled back a fraction and opened her eyes and looked at him from about 6 inches away, and he could see every detail of her face, the old silver scar, the line of her jaw, the precise architecture of her tusks, the amber eyes that held no armor at all right now. "I need to settle my carter's accounts," she said. "I will make dinner," he said. She straightened back to her full height and went to her waiting wagons, and he went back into his inn, and he stood in the kitchen for about 30 seconds doing absolutely nothing, because his face was doing something complicated and warm that he could not entirely control, and he decided not to try. The carters ate at the inn and slept under their wagons in the yard, and Zarkha sat at the table near the fire with a cup of hot wine, and Benjamin sat across from her, and they talked for 3 hours. Not about anything with great stakes, about the northern road, about Ostwin's market and the strange fashions of the city merchants, about the fishing boats she had watched from the dock the morning before she left, about the kind of winters the Frostwolf clan's Kareth Hills had versus the milder winters of the lake country. She had been to the Kareth Hills once, she said, to visit her mother after 3 years of road work, and she had stayed 2 months and then left again because she was not built for staying still, except that sometimes she wondered if she had gotten that part of herself wrong. Benjamin listened to all of this with the full, genuine attention of a person to whom she was interesting, and he watched the way she talked when she was comfortable. She used her hands for emphasis in ways she was clearly unaware of. Her gestures were large and precise, and when she was thinking through something she looked at the fire with the same focused expression she used when she was sharpening a blade. "You said you wonder if you got it wrong," he said. "The part about not staying still." She looked at him. "I have been on the road for 7 years," she said. "Escort work mainly, a few guard contracts. I know every road between the Kareth Hills and the coast." She turned the cup in her hands. "When I am on the road I am completely at ease. When I stop there is something very like unease." "What does the unease feel like?" he asked. A pause. "Like there is somewhere I should be that I have not found yet," she said. He sat with that. He thought about 4 years of empty mornings in an inn that had plenty of visitors but no one who stayed. He thought about the draft through the unfixed shutter. "I understand that feeling," he said. The fire shifted and settled. Outside the lake was dark and still. One of the carters was snoring in the yard, audible through the closed shutters. "I have been in a great many inns," Zarkha said. "I have not often eaten breakfast with the innkeeper." "I have often made breakfast for one," Benjamin said. "I prefer 2. She held his gaze with those amber eyes that were entirely open now. "Benjamin," she said. His name in her voice was different than it was in other people's mouths. It was more deliberate, more considered. She said it like she had decided on it. "Yes," he said. "What is this?" She said, he thought about being careful. He thought about being measured and moderate and not saying more than he should with a woman he had known for 4 days total, half of them a month ago. Then he thought about how many years he had been moderate and careful about things that mattered and decided against it. "I think," he said, "that you are the most remarkable person who has ever come through that door, and I am very glad you asked if you could stay." Her face did a remarkable thing. The careful control, the warrior's discipline, the watchful steadiness, all of it relaxed, just for a moment, all the way down. What was underneath was something younger and more open than he had seen, and it looked like the specific relief of a person who has carried a great weight for a long time and has found, quite unexpectedly, somewhere to set it down. She reached across the table and took his hand in both of hers, which was a gesture so simple and so enormous in its openness from her that it felt like an event. "I will be back in the spring," she said. "The escort season runs late winter to midsummer mostly. I cannot simply leave my contracts." "I know," he said. "I am not asking you to." "But in the spring," she said. It was both a statement and a question. "In the spring," he said, and turned his hand to hold hers back. She left in the morning with her carters, and he watched the wagons go north again, and this time the silence she left was entirely different. It was the silence of someone who has told you they are coming back. What followed was the kind of winter that is made bearable by correspondence. A system of message riders, the same one who had taken her letter to the Carters, ran between Murrenfeld and Carveth twice a week. And from Carveth letters could be forwarded on the various route networks to wherever along the road an escort was currently working. Benjamin was not sure, when he wrote the first letter, whether it would find her or whether she would write back. He wrote it anyway. He wrote about the first ice on the lake and a very stupid argument between 2 dock fishermen that had somehow involved his front stoop. He asked about the Ostwin-Carveth road in early winter and whether the weighhouse at Farrow's mill was as bad as everyone said it was. Her reply came 12 days later in a hand that was large and very precise, on paper that smelled faintly of leather and wood smoke. She confirmed that Farrow's mill weighhouse was as bad as everyone said and additionally had fleas. She wrote about a wolf encounter on the eastern leg near the Keth River crossing that had resolved itself when the wolves took one look at her and decided to find easier targets. She wrote about the quality of the moonrise over flat winter country, which she found very fine. She asked, at the end, what his uncle's name had been and whether he had liked running the inn. He wrote back. She wrote back. Through the hard end of autumn and the silver quiet of deep winter and the early, hesitant notes of spring, letters went back and forth between the crossroads lantern and wherever Zarkha Frostwolf happened to be on the road, and he kept her letters bundled in the desk behind the bar and read them again on slow evenings. He was happy. He noted this with some surprise. Not in a quiet, resigned way, but in an active, ongoing way. He was genuinely, specifically happy, and the reason was clear and uncomplicated and was called Zarkha Frostwolf. He also spent the winter watching what the commercial purity ordinance was doing to the corridor villages, and it was not good. Prefect Greer's office had sent 2 more rounds of commissioners. The bureau licensing requirement had been extended from Carveth's immediate corridor to the entire regional trade network. Doc Farrath had applied for a license and been sent back 3 times for additional paperwork, before being denied on grounds that the licensing board was not satisfied with his commercial character attestation, which was a phrase with no legal definition, and appeared to mean whatever the licensing board wished it to mean on the day. The Ork North Shore Farm family had had their trade license suspended. 3 Ork merchants who had been operating in the Murrenfeld dock market for years were gone by midwinter, pushed out, their stalls taken by others. It was happening slowly enough that people could tell themselves it was just paperwork and bureaucracy, not malice. But Benjamin had read the Commerce Licensing Act, and he could see the architecture of it, the way the new ordinances slotted into existing law to give legal cover to something that was, functionally, a purge. He wrote about this in his letters. He was not sure whether to or not it was not exactly romantic correspondence, but she had asked, in her third letter, whether the commissioners were still a presence, and so he told her honestly what he was seeing. Her reply to that letter was the longest she had written. She described what she had heard from other escorts and traders on the road, that the purge was not limited to Murrenfeld or even to Carveth region. It was a broader movement, with fingers in several of the regional governments simultaneously. She wrote about a fellow escort, an orc man named Durath, who had been detained at a checkpoint 2 weeks ago on the Keth River Road and had not been seen since. She wrote about it with the precise, flat anger of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by human official malice toward her kind and had channeled that anger into documentation rather than reaction. He wrote back, "I am sorry about Durath. I do not think that anger is sufficient, but I want you to know I am angry too." She wrote back, "I know." And then, after a line break in slightly different pressured handwriting as if she had stopped and restarted, "It matters to me that you are." He folded that letter and put it in his pocket and kept it there for a week. Spring arrived in Murrenfeld the way it always did in fits and starts, with false warm days followed by sharp cold snaps, until the ice on the lake finally broke up in a rush of grinding noise one morning in early thaw month, and the lake turned green instead of white, and the fishing boats pushed out again in earnest. Benjamin laid in his first supply order of the season and aired the rooms and replaced 2 mattresses and rebuilt the fire grate in room 3, which had been crumbling at the back. He was aware, without tracking it compulsively, of what the road north looked like on any given morning. She arrived on a Tuesday in full spring, when the dock road was thick with trade carts and the market stalls were all open and the lake shimmered under good sun. She rode ahead of 2 new wagons, different merchants this time, southbound with a cargo of processed timber. She was in the same leathers, the dark brown bodice and close-cut trousers, and knee-high boots, and her braids were tight and precise, and she was sitting her horse with the absolute self-possession of someone who had been doing this for 7 years and was very good at it. There was a new bruise fading at her temple, high up near the hairline. He noticed it immediately and said nothing about it until she was inside. "What happened to your temple?" he asked when she had settled at the bar with a cup of water. "Thrown from my horse on an icy patch 2 weeks ago near Pharaoh's Mill," she said without apparent distress. "The ground was hard, my head was harder, and you are sure it is just a bruise?" "I have had worse." She looked at him. "You are going to fuss." "I am not going to fuss," he said. "I am going to make sure you do not have a head wound, and then I will stop mentioning it." "I do not have a head wound," she said. "I promise you." He looked at the bruise, which was indeed fading to yellow and green at the edges days old, well past any serious concern. "Fine," he said. The corner of her mouth moved. "You were worried," she said. "I got your last letter and then nothing for 3 weeks," he said. "Letters from the road take time, I understand that, but Benjamin," she said. "Yes, I am here." He stopped. He looked at her. She was looking back at him with the full, open amber gaze, and something in it was warm in a way that had nothing to do with measurement or evaluation. She was just looking at him, glad to be looking at him. "You are here," he said. And then, because he was not going to be moderate about this, he came around the bar and she turned on her stool to face him, and he put his hands on her face, his thumbs at her cheekbones, and tilted her face up, which he was not tall enough to manage without her cooperation, which she gave by bending her neck, and he kissed her with 3.5 months of letters in it. She made a sound low in her chest that he felt more than heard, and both her arms came around him, and she was enormous and warm and present in a way that made the inn feel like a different place, not lonely and quiet but inhabited full. "I kept your letters," she said when they broke apart. "I kept yours," he said. "All of them?" she asked. "Every one," he said. "They are in the desk behind the bar." She looked at the desk and then at him, and her expression was one he had never seen on her before, not the warrior's calm, not the measured evaluation, not even the warm openness of their late-night conversations. This was softer than all of that. It was unguarded in the way that a wound is unguarded, the way that something just barely healed can still be touched in the right place and open again. "I should see to my Carters," she said. "You should," he agreed. He was still holding her face. "After that, dinner. Including breakfast," she said. "As many breakfasts as you want," he said. She stayed 5 days this trip, because the Ostwin timber merchants had a contract dispute that required 2 days of renegotiation before the cargo could continue south, and Zarkha had time in her contract clause for exactly this kind of delay. She spent the mornings on the dock, helping 2 of the local fishing families re-rig a net frame that had come apart in a spring storm, because she had observed it needed doing, and apparently could not observe a task that needed doing without offering her very large and competent hands to it. The fishermen, who had been wary of her on the first day, were easy with her by the second morning, and by the third Macon Dast, Saren's daughter-in-law who ran the South Side fishing operation, was hailing her by name from the dock. Benjamin watched all of this from the inn and felt a complicated and growing affection for his village, which was, in his experience, basically decent underneath its wariness, and for this woman who moved through it, with a directness and a competence that were winning people over not by trying to win them but by simply being entirely herself. The commissioners came back on the 4th day. Not the same 2. 3 this time, with a written authority from Prefect Greer's office that superseded the previous posting. They set up at the Dock Road junction with more furniture and a proper canvas tent, and a printed notice twice the size of the last one. Benjamin read the new notice. The Bureau licensing requirement had been expanded. It now covered not just commerce, but passage any orc individual traveling through a certified corridor, required a transit permit from the Bureau, which could only be obtained from the Bureau office in Carveth, and took a minimum of 3 weeks to process. There was no provision for people already in the corridor, which meant that any orc traveling the road right now today was technically in violation. It also stated, and this was new and made the cold run in Benjamin's blood, that any individual found harboring an unlicensed non-human without reporting them to the Bureau was subject to fine and loss of operating license. He looked up from the notice. Zarkha was down the dock, coiling the net line with Macon Dast, her back to the junction, unaware. He folded the notice and went inside and stood behind his bar and thought very carefully. Then he walked down to the dock. "Zarkha," he said. She looked up from the coiled line. She saw his face, read something in it, and stood up. She was a head and a half taller than him, and the dock boards creaked under her. "What happened?" he told her quietly about the new notice, about the transit permit requirement, about the harboring clause. She listened without interrupting, the amber eyes steady and flat. He could see the muscles in her jaw working, the only outward sign. "I see," she said when he finished. "You have been here 4 days," he said. "If they notice that, and they will notice because they have been asking in the village, I need you to know what the risk is." "The risk is to you," she said. "Your license." "The risk is to both of us," he said. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the commissioner's tent at the junction. She looked at Benjamin. "I should leave today," she said. "You could," he said, or she said, because she could hear the way people who are paying close attention to you can hear the rest of the sentence. He had been thinking about this for the last 20 minutes with the specific, reckless clarity of a man who has finally decided to stop being moderate about things that matter. "Or," he said, "you could stay." She blinked. "Benjamin. They will come here. They will ask about you. They will revoke your license." "Under the Commerce Licensing Act," he said, "a license cannot be revoked for harboring an individual who has a registered domicile at the licensed property. The Bureau cannot override that clause without a full court review, which takes 6 months minimum and requires evidence of criminal activity." He met her eyes. "If you were registered as residing here, not visiting, that clause would apply." She was entirely still. "Registered as residing here," she said. Yes, he said. The amber eyes were reading his face with a complete and total attention. That is not a small thing, she said. A registered domicile, that is a legal household. I know what it is, he said. He kept his voice steady and he kept his eyes on hers. I know what I am saying. She looked at him for a long time. Behind her, Macon Dast had tactfully found something to do with the net on the other end of the dock. The lake stretched behind Zarkha in all its spring green enormity, and the sun was warm on the dock boards, and somewhere a cartwheel was creaking. I have been on the road for 7 years, Zarkha said. You told me, he said. I have never had a registered domicile. You would have one, he said. Another pause longer. I still have contracts through midsummer, she said. I cannot simply walk away from them. I am not asking you to walk away from anything, he said. Register here. Come back when your contracts end. Travel the road in the meantime. The domicile stands regardless of whether you are physically here, legally speaking. I looked it up. You looked it up, she said, and in her voice was the same complicated warmth as when he had told her he had read the Commerce Licensing Act. He was beginning to understand that the thing she responded to most deeply in the guarded inner architecture of Zarkha Frostwolf was the evidence of someone paying careful attention on her behalf. I am asking you to let me do something for you, he said, legally and practically. Beyond that, whatever you want this to be, we can decide together. She looked at the junction. She looked at him. She looked at the lake. Do you have the registration form? She said. Behind the bar, he said. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then, show me. They went inside and he got the form and she signed her name on it, Zarkha Frostwolf, large and precise, and he signed his name on it and dated it and they sealed it with the inn's registered seal, and he sent Tomas to the alderman's office with it before the afternoon bell. 2 hours later, when one of the commissioners came to the crossroads lantern with a ledger and a pointed series of questions about the orc woman who had been observed at this property for 4 days, Benjamin showed him the registration and the Commerce Licensing Act clause and asked the commissioner if he had any further questions. The commissioner looked at the registration, looked at Benjamin, looked at the clause Benjamin had copied out in neat handwriting next to it, and left. Zarkha, who had been sitting at the fire with her cup of tea and her blade on her knees, looked at Benjamin when the door closed. That was well done, she said. I have been practicing, he said. He sat down across from her. The fire was warm. The lake afternoon light was coming through the windows in long gold bars. Benjamin, she said, yes. When you said whatever you want this to be, what do you want it to be? He looked at her. Her scarred jaw, her amber eyes, her tusks, her hands resting on the blade across her knees, all of it entirely familiar now, entirely welcome, entirely something he could not imagine the inn being without. I think you know what I want it to be, he said. She set the blade aside, carefully, on the table. She leaned forward in her chair and looked at him with her elbows on her knees and the full, open quality of her most unguarded expressions. I want to hear you say it. I want you to stay, he said, not just registered here with me. I want the mornings to have 2 plates. I want to hear from you about the Keth River Road and the quality of the moonrise and the fleas at Pharaoh's Mill. I want to be the place you come back to. I want this to be the somewhere you were looking for. She was very still. Her eyes were bright in a way he had not seen before, a brightness that had nothing to do with anger or intensity, and he realized with a private, wondering feeling that she was affected genuinely and deeply moved. That is what I want, she said. I have wanted it since I wrote the word home in a letter to you and then deleted it because it seemed like too much. You can use it, he said. It is yours, she said. It is yours, he said, and meant it all the way down. She reached across the space between their chairs and took his face in her hands the same way she had in the doorway the previous autumn, that holding, wondering gesture. And this time she kissed him slowly and with great thoroughness, and he put his arms around her as far as they would go, which was not quite all the way given the disproportion of their frames, but it was more than enough. She left on the 6th day with her carters, south now toward the timber markets. But the registration was filed, and it was legal, and it held. The weeks between her departure and her return were the most intense of the whole conflict with the commissioners, because Prefect Greer's office, finding its ordinance being worked around by registration loopholes and legal knowledge in at least 3 corridor villages, escalated. The new directive came down in early summer. Bureau agents, backed by the prefect's militia authority, were to conduct physical inspections of any registered domicile suspected of being fraudulent, that is, any registration that did not appear to reflect genuine cohabitation. If a domicile was judged fraudulent, the protections were void. Alderman Bruce came to the inn with this news and a worried face. "They are going to say the registration is fraudulent because she is not physically here," he said. "She is working her contracts," Benjamin said. "I know," said Bruce, "but their interpretation of genuine cohabitation is designed to be whatever they need it to be," Benjamin said flatly. "I know." He wrote to Zarkha immediately. The letter was direct. The legal ground was shifting. There was a way to hold it, but it required her to be present in Mernfeld. He did not put in writing what he was thinking, because letters could be read, but he thought she would understand the shape of what he meant. 3 weeks later, on a warm, early summer morning when the lake was its greenest and the dock market was at full Saturday bustle, he heard a horse on the north road. She came at a canter, alone, no wagons this time, just her and her bay horse and her pack. She turned from the north road onto the dock road, and the Saturday market parted for her, people stepping back, staring, and she was enormous on the horse in the morning sun, and she brought the horse to a stop in front of the crossroads lantern and looked down at him where he was standing in his front doorway. "I handed off the last contract at the weigh house to a colleague I trust," she said. "The cargo is safe. I have no further contracts until late autumn." She looked at him steadily. "I am here." He felt something settle in him like a beam being placed solid, load-bearing, final. "Come in," he said. She swung down from the horse with the easy, huge grace that he was entirely accustomed to and tied it at the post, and she walked into the crossroads lantern with the pack on her back and the blade at her hip and stopped in the middle of the common room and looked around it, at the fire, the bar, the lakeside windows, the 2 tables, the hallway to the rooms. She looked at it like someone looking at a thing they intend to keep. "It needs another hook by the door," she said, "for the pack." "I will put one in this afternoon," he said. She turned to look at him with the full, warm, amber gaze, and she said, "Benjamin, I need you to know what it means when an orc woman takes up a man's household and calls it hers." "Tell me," he said. "It is a claiming," she said. "In Frostwolf custom it is as binding as any human ceremony, more in some ways. When an orc woman takes a household and a man as hers, she is saying there is no other, that her word and her blade are in his service, that his life is hers to defend." She paused, "and that she will be claimed in return, fully, openly, in front of whatever witnesses exist." He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about everything she had just said, the density of it, the weight of it, the extraordinary thing that was being offered. "In front of whatever witnesses exist," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is not a private thing, it is declared." "Then let us declare it," he said. She blinked. "Now, the dock market is outside," he said. "I would say that is witnesses enough." She looked at the door, then at him, and the expression on her face was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, the complete and total dissolution of the last walls, the warm, open look of a person who has been handed exactly what they most wanted and cannot quite believe it is real. "You are not even a little frightened," she said. "Of you?" he said. "Yes, a little. That is appropriate. You are formidable." She laughed. A real laugh, full and low, richer than he had imagined it would be. He wanted to hear it for the rest of his life. "Come on, then," he said, and held out his hand. She took it. Her hand around his was warm and enormous and steady, and he opened the front door of the crossroads lantern onto the summer Saturday morning and the dock market and the lake beyond it, and he led Zarkha Frostwolf outside. The market had a particular quality in the first few seconds. People noticed them emerging hand in hand, and there was a ripple. the way there is a ripple when something is about to become an event. He could see Macon Dast near the fish stall, and Alderman Pruce at the edge of the market, and old Sarin Dast in his usual spot by the dock post, and perhaps 30 or 40 other people going about their Saturday business who were now, gradually, turning to watch. He could also see, coming down the dock road from the junction, two of Prefect Greer's bureau agents in gray coats, who had clearly spotted Zarkha's arrival and were heading for the inn with the purposeful stride of men with official business. They were perhaps 200 yards out. Zarkha had seen them too. "Now is a good time," she said very quietly. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. The morning was warm and the lake was green, and behind them was the inn, and ahead of them were the people of Murrenfeld and the agents of a man who had been trying to purge this woman from the corridor for the better part of a year. He turned to face the market and raised his voice. "My name is Benjamin Keller," he said. "I run the Crossroads Lantern. Most of you know me." He paused. He looked at Zarkha, who was standing beside him at her full height with her chin up and her face open and her hand in his. He looked back at the market. "This is Zarkha Frostwolf. She is a licensed escort, a warrior, and the best person I know. She has registered this address as her domicile. She is taking this household and this man as hers in the custom of her people. I am doing the same in mine." He looked at the alderman specifically. "Alderman Pruce, I am asking you to witness and record this." Pruce had already been walking toward them. He pulled his record book from his coat. "Witnessed," he said, clearly and in a carrying voice. A number of things happened at once. The bureau agents reached the edge of the market and pushed into it. The market crowd, which had been watching, did not entirely part for them the way they were accustomed to. There was a shift, not dramatic, not a riot, just the small, physical communal stubbornness of people who had collectively decided something, and the agents found themselves moving through a crowd that was not cooperative rather than through a crowd that was frightened. One of them called out, sharply, "That woman is under investigation for violation of the Transit Permit Ordinance. Everyone stand clear." Macon Dast, who was standing near the fish stall with her gutting knife in her hand, said, "She is a resident of this village. I am standing clear of nothing." Two of the dock fishermen, who Zarkha had spent 3 days helping re-rig net frames, moved to stand beside Macon without a word. Old Sarin Dast, who had been watching everything from his dock post with the expression of a man who had seen considerable history, slowly got to his feet. The agent who had spoken looked at the scene around him. The alderman with his record book, the woman in question standing her full height beside the innkeeper with a claimed household declaration just made in front of witnesses, a market crowd that was not frightened, and a record book that had already been opened. "She requires a transit permit," the agent said again, but with less certainty. Benjamin said, calmly and clearly, "She is a registered resident of a certified domicile and is not transiting the corridor. The Transit Permit Ordinance does not apply to residents. The Commerce Licensing Act precedent is clear. Alderman Pruce has the registration on file." "I do," said Pruce. The second agent had already started writing something in his ledger with the expression of a man looking for a charge that would stick and not finding one. The first agent looked at the crowd, which had grown and was not moving. Then something happened that Benjamin had not anticipated and would think about for the rest of his life. One of the agents, the first one, the one who had been shouting, decided to be physical about it. He stepped forward and reached for Zarkha's arm, the reaching grip of someone with official authority who is used to that authority being uncontested. He did not get close. Zarkha moved. Not to attack, he was clear on that afterward. What she did was step directly in front of Benjamin, placing herself between the agent's reaching hand and Benjamin's body, and she was simply there. 6'3" of orc warrior with a blade at her hip and her feet planted on the dock road stone and her amber eyes steady, and every inch of her communicating without a single word, that this line was not going to be crossed. The agent stopped. He stopped because stopping was the only reasonable response to the thing that was in front of him, and to his credit, he was at least reasonable. The market was completely silent. Zarkha looked at the agent and said in a perfectly level voice, "I am a registered resident and that man is mine, and you will not put your hands on either of us." It was the quietest, most contained thing she had said all morning. It was also, by some measure of weight and certainty and the particular quality of stillness that comes before violence, the most frightening. The agent stepped back. His colleague put the ledger away. They left. They walked back up the dock road to the junction with the particular walk of men who are leaving before they have to, and the market watched them go in silence. And then the market exhaled collectively and began talking all at once. Macon Das started laughing from the fish stall. One of the dock fishermen said something that made his colleague shout. Old Saran Das sat back down on his post with the expression of a man who had just witnessed something he would be talking about until he died. Benjamin turned to Zarkha. She was still facing the direction the agents had gone, her feet planted and her face forward and both hands at her sides. She was breathing steadily but deeply. "Zarkha," he said. She turned to look at him. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment with the open, unguarded amber gaze, the look that she gave to no one but him. She let out one slow breath. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" "I am very well," he said. "I am standing in the sun outside my inn next to the most remarkable person I have ever met." She looked down at him. The corner of her mouth curved, the almost smile that he had first seen on her second morning here, that had been becoming more and more an actual smile with every passing week. "We still need to do this properly," she said. "The claiming. In the custom of my people there is a word, said in front of witnesses." "Then say it," he said. She looked at him with her full face open to the summer morning, and the gathered, watching market and the silver lake behind her, and she said, in the old Frostwolf tongue, a word that he did not know the exact translation of but that she had written to him about once. A word that meant, roughly, mine kept, mine chose, mine and kept and known. She said it with her hand on his face and her forehead bent to his and her eyes closed, the same posture as the first time she had kissed him, as if this was the completion of something that had begun in that moment in the autumn doorway when he asked her to come in out of the rain. He said, in his own plain human words, "I am yours, Zarkha Frostwolf. You are mine, you are home." Her forehead pressed against his. She was warm and enormous and present and entirely here. The lake glittered behind her in the summer sun. The market hummed back to life around them. Alderman Preuss wrote it in the record book and dated it and signed it and closed the book. There were things that needed doing, the commissioners would file reports, and there would likely be more letters from Carveth, and Prefect Greer would not simply accept the block on his ordinance without pushing back through other channels. Benjamin knew this. Zarkha knew it better. They would face all of it. But right now, Benjamin Keller was standing outside the crossroads lantern in full summer sun, with Zarkha Frostwolf's forehead against his and her hand on his face, and the claiming words still warm in the air between them and the village of Murrenfeld around them, and the lake beyond that, and all the roads of the world beyond the lake, all of which led here, and he had never in his life felt less alone. Later, much later, after the market had gone back to its business, and the afternoon had lengthened into gold, they were inside at the fire. Just the two of them, which was in itself already different, because it was not the brief fire sitting of a traveler with a few nights to spare, but the settling of people who lived here, who were here together, and had nowhere else to be. She was in his chair, which was marginally the better of the two common room chairs, and which she had taken with the serene assumption of someone who understood what claiming a household meant in practical terms, and he was in the other, and they were sitting with the comfortable proximity of people who had decided. "I need to write to my mother," she said. "Tell her I want to meet her," he said. She looked at him sideways. "She will be thorough," she said. "Good," he said. "I can be thorough." She almost smiled and then actually smiled, and the smile was extraordinary and warm and entirely hers. He had been watching it become more frequent for months, and he planned to keep watching it for the rest of his life. "The hook for the pack," she said. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "And the shutter in room 2 is drafty," she said. "I know," he said. "I have been meaning to fix it." "I will fix it," she said, "tomorrow." "I will make breakfast," he said, "for 2." She looked at the fire and then at him, and the amber eyes were warm and steady and entirely home. "For 2," she said. Outside, the crossroads lantern sign creaked in the evening lake breeze. The dock road was quiet. The water was dark and still and stretched away in every direction, enormous and silver and full of depth. The village settled into its evening sounds. And inside, around the fire, 2 people sat in the particular silence of those who have found each other and closed the distance and are, at last, simply and completely together. The inn felt different now. Not just inhabited, claimed. The draft through the unfixed shutters would be fixed. The empty morning would have 2 plates. The ledger behind the bar would show a registered household with 2 names on it, and whatever Prefect Greer's office sent down the road next, it would find both of them here, side by side, which was a considerably different prospect than either of them alone. Benjamin sat in the firelight and thought about the night in autumn when she had come through the door enormous and furious and completely soaking wet and had asked, with the flat practicality of someone who expected to be refused, for a room. He thought about handing her a towel. He thought about 2 plates at breakfast. He thought about wet dock boards and a replaced iron bolt and a hand over his, warm and steady. He thought about her first letter, arriving in the early winter, smelling of leather and wood smoke. He thought about the words she had deleted and then told him about. He thought about her walking out of his door every time and coming back every time, and the last time being the last departure because she was here now, and the roads all led back to him. Zarkha turned from the fire and looked at him with those amber eyes, and she reached out and put her hand over his the way she had on the dock in autumn, covering it, warm and certain. He turned his hand to hold hers back. 3 coppers a night, he said. She looked at him with complete warmth and absolutely no expression of patience whatsoever, which was the exact face she made when she thought he was being ridiculous and loved him for it. "Including breakfast," she said. "Including breakfast," he said, "for the rest of your life if you want it." She squeezed his hand once firmly, the way she had shaken it that first night, honest about her strength, honest about everything. "I want it," she said. The fire settled. The lake lay dark and wide outside the windows. The crossroads lantern stood at the junction of all its roads and held its warmth against the night, and inside it, Zarkha Frostwolf and Benjamin Keller sat together at the fire, claimed and claiming, found and finally, fully, home.